She sheltered a stranger and his son, not knowing he was a millionaire, sent to take her home. The wind howled through the mountain pass like invisible blades slashing the air, rattling the frosted windows of the aging wooden cabin. In the dim, flickering light, Clara Bennett sat curled up by the small fireplace, the flames struggling to fight back the bone-deep cold. Outside, the small mountain town in Colorado had been completely cut off by a sudden blizzard. The power had gone out earlier that afternoon, and the cell signal vanished as if the world beyond had been swallowed whole by a white void. Clara pulled the frayed wool blanket tighter over her shoulders, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the loneliness that had burrowed deep inside. This cabin was all her mother had left behind. It used to be full of laughter, the scent of fresh bread, and bedtime stories by the fire. But since her mother passed 3 years ago, it had become nothing but an echo chamber. The memories remained, but they couldn't warm her tonight. Clara had once been a beloved elementary school teacher in town. The pay was modest, but it gave her purpose. After the school shut down due to budget cuts, she lost her job. With no income and no one left, she lived off what little savings she had and sold her belongings one by one. Life had become a long silence, just like the cabin around her, quietly decaying. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the room, rapid, urgent, shattering the stillness. Clara jolted upright. Who would be outside in weather like this? She held her breath and listened. The wind still roared, but the knocking continued. Another knock, louder now, followed by a hoarse male voice through the door. "Please open up. I'm begging you. My son's sick. We're stuck in the storm." Clara stood, the blanket falling away. She moved toward the door, her hand gripping the iron poker by the hearth like a weapon. For a moment, she froze, torn between fear and the last flicker of conscience. No one knew she lived here. But what if it was true? What if a child was out there in this blizzard? She tugged the curtain aside and peered through the window. All she could see was white. But beyond the door stood a tall figure, holding something small in his arms. Snow whipped around them, relentless. "Who are you?" Clara shouted, trying to keep her voice firm. Marcus Doyle, this is Liam, my son. Please, he won't last much longer." Clara stood frozen before the door, her breath sharp and shallow. The icy wind cut through the wooden seams of the cabin, carrying with it the faint, pitiful sound of a child's cry. Her fingers still gripped the iron poker, her thoughts tangled in chaos. Worst-case scenarios flashed through her mind. A con artist, a thief using the storm as cover, or someone who somehow knew she lived alone and waited for the perfect moment. But then, a memory surfaced, her mother's eyes in those final hospital days. Still gentle, still whispering, "Never shut your heart completely, even when the world turns cold." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, her entire body trembling, not just from cold or fear, but from the voice of her conscience screaming inside her. She didn't have much left to lose, but if there truly was a child out there, fading in the snow, how could she live with herself if morning came and she found a tiny frozen body just outside her door? The knocking grew weaker. The man's voice cracked with desperation. "Please." Clara swallowed hard, her hand trembling as it reached for the bolt. The cold burst through instantly, stinging her eyes. "Just one night," she whispered to herself, "just to save the child." And then the door burst open, wind and snow flooding in like a tidal wave. The man stepped inside, clutching the child tightly. His coat was covered in snow, his face pale with cold. The boy didn't stir, his lips tinged purple from fever and exposure. "Thank you, Marcus whispered, his voice strained and desperate. She slammed the door shut, bracing her back against it as if trying to hold the storm at bay. Silence returned to the cabin, broken only by the man's heavy breathing and the soft whimpers of the child. "Put him by the fire," Clara said, her voice hoarse but firm. The man obeyed without hesitation. He pulled off his gloves, then gently removed his snow-covered coat and wrapped it around the boy. The child gasped weakly, lips purple, cheeks flushed with fever. Clara kept her distance, still clutching the iron poker. Her eyes never left the man. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he replied, voice raspy. "Marcus Doyle. This is my son, Liam. He's 6. Clara nodded slightly, but her gaze remained cold. "What are you doing out here in a storm like this?" "We were driving back from Denver. The car died. No signal, no help. I saw light from your cabin." He met her eyes, exhausted but sincere. There was nowhere else to go. Clara didn't respond immediately. She studied him. No tattoos, no erratic behavior, no shifty eyes. But suspicion clung tightly, partly from instinct, partly because this cabin was the only piece of stability she had left. "I don't have anything worth stealing," she said flatly. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not here to take anything. I just want my son to survive." Silence filled the room, broken only by the gentle crackling of firewood. Eventually, Clara lowered the poker and set it on a chair, but still within reach. She moved into the small kitchen, grabbed a thick blanket, and returned to cover Liam. The boy flinched at her touch, his eyes fluttering open for a moment before falling shut again. Clara placed a hand on his forehead, still burning. She turned to Marcus. "He needs his fever brought down now. I've got some medicine left, but there's no doctor nearby." "I understand. Thank you," Marcus began, but Clara cut him off. "Don't thank me. I haven't decided how long you'll be staying." Marcus dipped his head. "Just one night. We'll leave as soon as the storm lets up." Clara didn't answer. She sat down in a chair across the room, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes never left the two of them. There was something in the way Marcus held his son, how he shielded him with his own body, that made it hard to look away. But it wasn't enough to earn her trust. Outside, the wind screamed. Snow kept falling, endless and blinding. Inside the cabin, the silence stretched. But somewhere in the flicker of the fire, something small and quiet began to soften inside Clara, something that hadn't moved in a long time. The fire roared gently, casting flickering light across the worn wooden floor of the cabin. Clara sat motionless in the chair opposite the hearth, eyes fixed on the boy curled beneath the blankets. Marcus sat beside him, one hand resting on Liam's burning forehead. Outside, the wind still screamed, as if determined to bury the world in snow. Clara reached for the warm cloth, dipping it into the bowl of water beside the fire. She approached slowly, hesitantly, then knelt beside Liam. When the cloth touched his brow, he whimpered, a weak sound, but one that pierced her chest. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered. Her hand trembled as it brushed against his flushed cheek, but her touch was gentle. Liam mumbled in his fever dream, "Mom, Mommy." Clara froze for a moment. That sound, that small, broken cry, echoed like something torn from her own past. Her heart faltered. In her mind, her mother appeared again, frail, lying in a hospital bed, once calling Clara's name in the same trembling voice. She remembered the nights spent at her mother's bedside, watching her fade away, one day at a time. The way her mother smiled through the pain. The last thing she ever said, "Don't let the pain turn you cold, Clara. Be good, even when the world isn't." Clara leaned in, gently wiping sweat from Liam's forehead. Every motion was slow, careful, as though she were tending to a memory of herself. Marcus looked up, quietly watching. The suspicion in his gaze was gone, replaced by awe. He saw something in Clara that was rare, kindness without a reason. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. voice thick with emotion. "You've already done more than enough." Clara didn't answer. She kept wiping Liam's brow, her eyes fixed on the boy, as though stopping would make the warmth disappear. "He's burning up. If it doesn't come down soon, he could seize," she said. Her tone was even, but no longer cold. Marcus lowered his eyes. "I didn't bring any medicine. It's all still in the car. And now there's no way to reach it." Clara stood and walked to the tiny kitchen, pulling open the wooden cupboard. She retrieved an old bottle and measured out a dose with care, skin burning beneath her touch like a hidden fire. She changed the cloth again and again, each movement slow and steady, unhurried, unwavering. Whenever Liam whimpered, Clara leaned in, whispering something soft. Sometimes it was nothing more than a gentle murmur, but somehow it carried warmth. "It's all right now. You're okay." She brushed back his damp hair, wiped the sweat from his temples, then tucked the blanket carefully around his small frame. Every motion was precise, tender, so much so that Marcus could only sit in silence, watching. Clara, the same woman who had gripped an iron poker in fear just hours ago, was now kneeling beside his son, gently wiping sweat, whispering comfort as if Liam were a part of her own flesh and blood. Not out of obligation, not because anyone asked her to, but because she simply couldn't turn away. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a tightness rise in his throat, not from fear but from emotion. There was something in the way Clara cared for Liam that reminded him of his late wife, how Emily used to whisper to Liam when he was sick, how she'd place her hand on his forehead as though love itself lived in her fingertips. "You're really kind," Marcus said softly, almost like a confession. "I don't think I deserve your help." Clara glanced at him but said nothing. Still, her eyes softened, as if she understood what he couldn't put into words. The room remained quiet, but the air had shifted. Something small, something fragile, but undeniably real, had appeared. A thread just beginning to tie itself between two strangers, woven from a winter storm and the wounds they didn't yet dare to name. The next morning, the sky was pale gray, and light snow still drifted down, like the storm had only just begun. Clara stirred from a restless sleep in the wooden chair, her back stiff, eyes raw from the long night. She looked over at Liam, still asleep, his fevered cheeks now calmer, his breathing steady. Her heart eased, just a little. Marcus had already packed their things. He wrapped the blanket tightly around his son, lifting him gently like something fragile. "We're going to check on the car, try to get back to town before the snow worsens," he said. "Thank you for everything." Clara only nodded. She said nothing as she opened the door for them. The sharp suspicion of the night before had dulled, but trust hadn't taken its place. She stood there, watching the two figures disappear into the white fog, until silence returned. Back inside, while tidying up, she noticed Marcus's coat draped over the chair. A sliver of paper peeked from its pocket. She pulled it free, a clean-cut business card, the text crisp and unmistakable. Marcus Doyle, Senior Attorney, Hathaway and Doyle, Legal Representative, National Land Bank. Clara froze. She stared at the card, her breath catching, heart dropping like a stone. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was the cruelest irony that the man she had let in from the storm was the same man sent to tear her world down, piece by piece. National Land Bank, the very name stamped on every letter of warning she'd received all year. The same bank now preparing to seize this cabin, her mother's last gift to her. And Marcus, the man she had let in, the man whose child she had cared for, was their legal representative. A low, burning fury began to rise, but grief cut deeper. She had opened her door. She had cared for his child with what little compassion she had left. And now she realized the man she'd thought was just a desperate father was the very man sent to strip her of the last piece of her life, Clara stood, stumbling toward the door, flung it open as if the cold might somehow put out the fire in her chest. She took a deep breath, then closed it again, resting her forehead against the wooden frame. Tears rose, but she swallowed them. "Liar," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm such a fool." The warmth of the night before evaporated. The cabin felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the echo of betrayal. A few hours later, Clara stepped into the small branch bank in town. The sterile air and flickering fluorescent lights made the space feel even colder. She approached the counter, voice calm but firm. "I need to know who requested the foreclosure on Cabin 87, Pine Hill Road." The woman behind the desk checked her screen, then replied. "The repossession was initiated by Harold Langston." Clara went still. Harold? Her uncle? Her mother's brother? The same man who had vanished after the funeral, refusing to deal with anything related to the estate. And now, he was behind this. Clara clenched her fists, nails digging into cold palms. But this time, it wasn't fear. And it wasn't helplessness. It was resolve. She left the bank with her head high, heart pounding with a fire she hadn't felt in years. She would fight for this home, not just for herself, but for her mother. In the days following the truth, Clara barely had time to feel the hurt. She woke before sunrise each morning, taking on any work she could find, cleaning, cooking, dishwashing at the local cafe, even tutoring children in the evenings. Every dollar she earned went straight toward paying off the mountain of debt her mother had left behind. She started selling off what was left in the cabin, her mother's antique clock, the winter teacup set, even the old books she once swore she'd never part with. Every item carried a memory, a heartbeat of the past, now exchanged for the fragile breath of the present. Clara grew thinner, her cheeks hollowed, eyes dark with fatigue. But she said nothing, complained to no one, shed no tears. Across town, Marcus was trapped in a different silence. He no longer worked at the law office. After withdrawing from the cabin case, he'd been suspended by the firm. But what haunted him most wasn't his career. It was Clara's eyes. The look in them, not anger, but something far worse, disappointment. He remembered the night of the storm, the warmth of that kitchen, the way Clara had tended to Liam as if he were her own, her soft voice, her steady hands. And he thought, I betrayed the kindest person I've ever met. One late spring afternoon, Clara visited the town hospital to check on a former student. As she passed the emergency wing, she heard a child crying, a voice she somehow recognized. She turned, heart dropping, as she saw Liam, pale and weak, being wheeled on a stretcher. Marcus followed close behind, face ashen. "Liam," Clara whispered, instinct carrying her forward. Marcus looked up, not surprised to see her, almost as if he'd been hoping, but didn't dare to expect. "Please," he said, voice breaking, "it's pneumonia, high fever. They're keeping him for at least a week." Clara looked into Liam's feverish eyes, red-rimmed, scared. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She turned to the nurse. "Tell me which room. I'm staying with him tonight?" She sat by Liam's bedside all night, cooling his forehead, holding his hand, whispering stories, though he was too delirious to respond. Not for Marcus, not for forgiveness, just for Liam. The next morning, Marcus found her slumped asleep beside the bed. He sat across from her, hands clasped tightly. "I know I don't deserve to ask anything more of you," he began, his voice low. "But I want to help, legally. I still have the knowledge, the skills. I want to make it right." Clara didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed on the sleeping boy. "I don't need you," she said quietly. "I can handle this." "I believe that," Marcus replied. "But you shouldn't have to do it alone. Let me at least try to fix a little of what I broke." Silence fell between them. Then Clara turned, her eyes red but her voice steady. "I agree, but not because of you." Marcus nodded, not needing more. But then Clara added, her tone clear, "Only because of Liam. That boy shouldn't suffer for what the adults did." Marcus bowed his head, and in that quiet forgiveness hadn't come yet, but a second chance had quietly begun. Fragile, but real. In the days that followed, the little cabin on the hill lit up each night, not from fever or snowstorms this time, but from Clara and Marcus working late into the evening, preparing for the most important battle of her life. Beneath layers of age and old paper, they unearthed vital fragments. A handwritten copy of Clara's mother's will, a notarized duplicate from the old county clerk's office, and an unsent letter, one her mother had written to Harold, asking him to leave the house alone. That night, Clara sat by the fire, holding the letter, eyes rimmed red. I thought I had nothing left, but maybe she never stopped fighting for me. Marcus sat nearby, quiet. He didn't speak. He had learned by now that sometimes silence was the only answer worth offering. Clara hadn't forgiven him. Not yet, but she had accepted Marcus's presence as something more than an intruder, perhaps a reluctant ally, not for him, but for the house, for her mother, and for the boy who had unknowingly become a bridge between two broken worlds. And then, the day of the hearing arrived. A heavy hush fell over the town courthouse. It was small, but packed. Harold sat at the front, straightening his tie, his expression cold and unreadable. Behind him sat two attorneys from Marcus's former law firm, faces sharp and polished. Clara entered with Marcus beside her. She wore her mother's old knit dress, her face calm, but eyes alight. She had no attorney, only the man who had once betrayed her and was now standing beside her. The judge arrived. The session began. Harold argued that Clara was financially incapable of upholding the mortgage left by her mother and requested permission to seize the property. He submitted what he claimed was the official will, signed recently, granting him full ownership. Then Marcus rose. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady, "I was formerly the legal representative for Mr. Harold Langston. But today I stand here with a greater obligation, an obligation to the truth." A murmur spread through the courtroom. "I present evidence that the will Mr. Langston submitted has been altered, its date falsified, and lacking notarization from any verified local office." He handed over the original will Clara had found, bearing a dated notary stamp and her mother's signature. Then came the letter, the one with matching handwriting, expressing her mother's wish for the house to remain Clara's. The judge furrowed his brow, ordering the documents to be examined. Harold's lawyers objected, but had no stronger originals to counter. "And further," Marcus continued, turning to face Harold directly, "I have evidence that Mr. Langston applied pressure on banking staff to falsify timestamps in order to accelerate the foreclosure." Harold shot up. "You dare? You worked for me." "And I walked away when I saw the truth," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm no longer your attorney." Clara looked at him, throat tight. She knew what his words meant. Career suicide. He had just accused a former client, exposed the very firm that once paid him, walked a razor's edge, alone, not for reputation, not for gain, but because it was right. The judge called a recess and postponed the trial, pending verification of the will and investigation into the fraud allegations. As Clara stepped outside the courthouse, her feelings were tangled. This wasn't victory. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she no longer felt alone in the fight. A few days after the hearing, while Clara was sorting through old boxes in the attic, an envelope from the bank was slipped under her door. She didn't expect much anymore from letters bearing that familiar stamp. Most had brought nothing but bad news. But this one felt different. When she opened the thick envelope, her heartbeat paused for a moment. Inside was an official notice confirming that her mother's outstanding debt had been paid off in full. No long explanations. Just one simple line at the bottom of the page. Paid in full by a third party, anonymous. Clara sat in silence for a long while, reading it over and over again. There was no name, no clue to reveal who had paid such a large sum. But her heart, in a quiet and unmistakable way, thought immediately of Marcus. No proof, no promises made. But something in the way he had looked at her in court, the way he had silently stood up for her, made her believe there was no one else it could be. That afternoon, she walked slowly to the town park, unsure what she meant to say, or if she even wanted confirmation. And then she saw him. Marcus gently pushing Liam on the swing, his face more at ease than the last time they met. She approached, calm but direct. "The bank sent me a letter," she said. He looked up, not surprised, and nodded as if he had been expecting it. "Someone paid off the debt. Anonymous." She looked at him, waiting, but Marcus only lowered his head and offered a quiet smile. "I think some things are better done without a name attached." It wasn't a confirmation, nor a denial, but Clara didn't need him to say more. She understood, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to resist that truth. Maybe some acts of kindness are best accepted in silence. In the days that followed, Clara began restoring the cabin, not because of obligation to her mother or fear of losing the last piece of the past, but because she wanted this place to live again, in a new way, with new meaning. She patched the leaking roof herself, replaced the old termite-eaten window frames, and repainted each faded wall. The storage room in the back was cleaned out, refurnished, and turned into a cozy guest room. Neighbors stopped by to help. Someone brought brushes, someone else offered lumber. Even a few of the children she once taught, now older, returned to help repaint the fence. Clara didn't explain exactly what she was doing, but through her quiet determination, everyone began to understand. She was turning the cabin into a safe place for those who had nowhere left to go. Not a shelter, not an official program. Just a cabin, warm and simple, ready to open its door, just as it once had on that snowy night for Marcus and Liam. One weekend afternoon, as Clara was rearranging bookshelves in the newly painted guest room, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find Marcus and Liam standing on the porch, each holding a small box. He gave a hesitant smile. "We thought we could help paint the fence," Marcus said. Clara didn't answer right away. Then she stepped aside and opened the door wider. That afternoon, the three of them worked in the yard. There weren't many words, only the steady sound of paintbrushes against wood, Liam's laughter when he spilled paint on his shoes, and the gentle glow of afternoon sunlight slipping through the trees, casting warm golden streaks across the porch. Clara stood for a moment at the edge of the cabin, looking around. The cabin had changed, not just because of the repairs, but because the air around it had shifted. It was no longer a place to cling to memories, but a place to build something new. Marcus, the man who once broke her trust, was now, piece by piece, rebuilding it. Not through apologies, but through quiet, honest action. No words were needed. Sometimes the deepest kindness lives in what is never explained. And real redemption, perhaps, begins with one simple thing, reaching out a hand at the right moment. Winter passed like a long, quiet breath, cold and still, yet somehow it was during this time that Clara felt her heart begin to thaw. The cabin wasn't just repaired, it had come alive again, through hands that offered help, through eyes that understood, and through words that didn't need to be spoken. Marcus never asked for forgiveness, and Clara never said she'd given it. But in the quiet afternoons spent painting fences together, in the still moments reading beside Liam, something began to grow. Not love in a rush, but trust, rebuilt slowly after being broken. And then, one early spring morning, as the last of the snow finally melted, Clara stepped onto the porch and looked out toward the woods beyond. Everything was still as simple as before: the wooden cabin, the dirt road, the breeze whispering through the trees. But inside her, something had shifted, as if this spring wasn't just the beginning of a season, but the beginning of a life. The house was no longer just a place for memories. It had become a beginning for lives just starting over. Clara placed a small wooden sign at the porch, its letters hand-carved with care. If you need a place to breathe, stay. No forms, no explanations. All it asked was that someone needed a spot to rest, to exhale, and to start trusting again. The first to arrive were an elderly man who had just lost his wife, a single mother with a toddler on her hip, and a young man with tired eyes and nowhere to go. They came, stayed for a few days or a few weeks, and then moved on, taking with them something quietly mended. At first the townsfolk were curious, but over time they understood. Some brought blankets, others canned goods. A few came just to split firewood or sit quietly on the porch with a stranger. The cabin had become a gentle pause, a place where no one had to explain why they were tired, only that they needed shelter. Clara never asked too many questions. She simply made another bowl of soup, laid out another blanket. And strangely, in caring for others, she began to heal herself. One morning in early May, while hanging laundry in the backyard, Clara received a letter. There was no sender's name, only a handwritten return address, shaky and familiar. It was from Harold. Inside was a short note. There were no excuses. No attempt to reclaim a broken bond. Just a simple apology. Sincere, quiet, and late. Clara, I don't expect your forgiveness. I only hope you'll go on living without bitterness. That house, it was always meant to be yours. I just took far too long to see it. Clara folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to hide and not to cling to. Just to remember, some wounds cannot be erased, but when the one who caused them finally names the hurt, even late, it becomes a way to let go. That evening, a soft wind stirred through the trees behind the cabin. Clara sat on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, watching Liam play in the yard with a few neighbor kids. The sky darkened gently, as if pulling the curtain closed on a quiet, full day. Marcus arrived and rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's a peaceful night," he said. Clara smiled, giving a small nod. He sat beside her, pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small box. He didn't speak right away, just opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring, elegant in its quietness. The light from inside the cabin caught its edges, reflecting soft glimmers on the thin metal. "I can't promise I'll never disappoint you," Marcus said, eyes steady on hers. "But I won't leave again. Not when you need me, not when Liam needs me. I can't erase the past, but if you'll let me, I want to write the rest of the story with you." Clara didn't answer at first. She looked at the ring, then at Liam, laughing, running laps around the small yard, unaware that something important was unfolding behind him. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but from knowing that sometimes what we thought could never be repaired could begin again with one honest question. She nodded. Marcus smiled, not a bright, triumphant grin, but the kind of smile shaped by regret, healing, and quiet courage. In that moment, Liam ran up, flinging his arms around Clara's neck. His little hands clutched tightly, and then he whispered the words that made her chest tighten in the most unexpected way. "Mama Clara!" He said it so naturally, as if the name had always belonged to her. And for the first time, Clara didn't just feel like a daughter or a woman trying to preserve a memory. She felt like a mother, a person chosen, not by blood, but by love. 3 people, once strangers, once wary, once hurt, now sat side by side on the very porch that had opened during a snowstorm. The wind still moved through the trees. The leaves still whispered. But there were no more howls in the dark, only the sound of a child's laughter, the scent of fresh-baked bread, and hands quietly, gently finding their place in one another. The door that once opened out of mercy had become the door that led home,